Hello, everyone, and welcome to another conference tournament preview edition of the Zach Kroll Sports Podcast. We are here today talking about the SEC tournament, and I think of all of the conference tournaments, there's always something special about the SEC. This is always such a competitive league, a league, I should say, that is filled with so many good young coaches, and they will all be on display this week in Nashville at Bridgestone Arena for the SEC tournament. Starting on Wednesday, March 10th, ending on Sunday, March 14th. It will be a 5-day event. And before I start off, I just wanted to let you guys know, Auburn, the Tigers, Bruce Pearl's squad, they are ineligible for the postseason this year after self-imposing a postseason ban. So Auburn will not be participating, and it will be a 13-team tournament, unlike the normal 14 teams. But in case you missed the last couple podcasts I have done, for every Power 6 conference tournament, I'll be publishing a preview podcast of the conference tournament, and I'm going to be giving you guys full insight of each and every team in that league, full predictions for the tournament, awards as well. I'm really excited to talk about the SEC, and I mentioned the awards. In case you guys want to keep track with me at home, I will be crowning an SEC Player of the Year, an SEC Coach of the Year, an SEC Freshman of the Year, the Most Improved Player Award in the SEC, my biggest disappointment in the SEC, and my 5 selections for the first team all-conference squad. In case you guys wanted to play along at home, feel free. You guys could make your selections, and we'll see if we agree. And then I will also be making my full predictions for this SEC conference tournament. And if you guys want to keep up with me, you could make your predictions as well. But I'm going to be giving you guys not only predictions, but full insight and analysis on each and every team in the Southeastern Conference. So without further ado, let's get it started. Round 1, Game 1, here we go. The number 13 seed will be Buzz Williams and his Texas A&M Aggies. They finish with an overall record of 8-9, and they will be taking on the number 12 seed Vanderbilt Commodores under head coach Jerry Stackhouse. And when you look at this game, it is the 13 versus 12 matchup. The winner will move on to take on the number 5 seeded Florida. So this is basically a play-in game into round 2 of the SEC tournament. And let's start off with Texas A&M, because I do think that Texas A&M in this game, even though they are the lower seed, I think they're the more interesting team. We all know Buzz Williams and the phenomenal work that he was able to do as the head coach of the Virginia Tech Hokies and at Marquette. He is a guy that is known for changing programs and turning programs around. But unfortunately, at Texas A&M, when we watch the Aggies, the on-the-court product hasn't necessarily been there over the last 2 years. Now, they did have a nice run towards the back end of last season. I remember watching Texas A&M at the beginning of Buzz Williams' first year in charge and saying to myself, wow, this is legitimately one of the worst Power 6 teams in all of college basketball. And towards the back end of the season, by season's end, they were a top 7 seed in the SEC tournament if that would have taken place. So I do think Buzz Williams, he can turn things around at Texas A&M. The problem is, so far this season has been a little bit of a disappointment, and a lot of that has to do with COVID. The Aggies are another team that has been devastated by COVID more than most. And when you look at their schedule so far this season, they only played TCU in non-conference. That was their only real marquee non-conference game. They lost that. And throughout the regular season, they picked up a win against Auburn. They picked up a win on the road against Mississippi State. That's good. Picked up a win in the Big 12 SEC Challenge against Kansas State. And that is really all this team has. And they have had also 7 games canceled because of COVID. And that's a lot, or 8, I should say, actually. That's a lot. And as a student athlete, it obviously puts you out of a rhythm. I'm not going to sit here and tell you guys that Texas A&M was going to be an NCAA tournament team this year by any stretch of the imagination, but there is some talent on this team. Emmanuel Miller, I think he is one of the more improved players in all of college basketball. He averaged about 16 points per game, 8 rebounds per game. He's a really good player. Quentin Jackson averaging 10.5 points, shooting 41% from 3. Savion Flagg shooting averaging 8.8 points per game. Andre Gordon is a nice little point guard. J.J. Chandler, Kevin Marfo, the transfer, a very good rebounder, very good blocks guy. So Texas A&M does have some talent, and it has been a disappointing season that they are here in the 12-13 game of the SEC tournament. Now, the team they will be taking on will be Jerry Stackhouse and his Vanderbilt Commodores. And this was a season for the Commodores that I think they could have gone anywhere, but they couldn't have gone anywhere but up from last year, because last year Vanderbilt was awful. And really, for the most part of this season, Vanderbilt was pretty bad as well. I understand this job is one of the toughest in college basketball. When you look at that gym, I mean, realistically, who wants to play there? And even though it was a tough season for Vanderbilt, they did have their moments. They did have a nice win against Mississippi State, had a nice win on the road against Cincinnati, had a home win against South Carolina. But prior to that game on January 30th, Vanderbilt was sitting at a 4-8 overall record and a 0-6 record in the SEC. So it hasn't been a great season for Vanderbilt. But I will say this: Scottie Pippen Jr. is a legitimate scorer. He could really score the basketball. He averaged 20.6 points per game, 2.8 rebounds per game, 4.9 assists per game. It's unfortunate that he plays at a school like Vanderbilt that is literally so irrelevant that no one is really ever watching this guy, because he could play. And him along with Dylan Disu averaging 15 points per game, those two both put up pretty dynamic numbers. Jordan Wright and Maxwell Evans, the other guards on this team, the Notre Dame transfer, DJ Hardy, hasn't really been that involved so far. Neither has the Kansas transfer, Isaac McBride. Each of those guards averaging about 5 points per game. When you look at this Vanderbilt team, man, I have no reason to pick them to beat anyone. I know Texas A&M hasn't been good at all, but I do trust Buzz Williams as a head coach more than I trust Jerry Stackhouse as a head coach. These two teams did not play during the regular season. Both of their matchups were canceled due to COVID. So I'm going to take Buzz Williams, the better coach team and the more talented team, and the Aggies to move on to take on Florida. I'm telling you, I don't think the Aggies are this bad. I just think their season really got altered because of COVID, and unfortunately, they were never able to recover. So I'm going to take Buzz Williams and the Aggies to get the win. I'm telling you, I think Emmanuel Miller is a really good player and one of the more improved players in all of college basketball. Give me the Aggies over the Commodores. Okay, moving on to the next game in the SEC tournament, game number 2. This will be between the number 9 seed, Ben Howland, and his Mississippi State Bulldogs. They will be taking on John Calipari and the 8 seed in the SEC tournament. Yes, you heard that right. The number 8 seed, Kentucky Wildcats. And I do think Kentucky and their performance in this SEC tournament is going to be one of the major storylines for a lot of people going in, because we all know just how high the expectations for the Kentucky Wildcats were this season, and unfortunately, not only did they not live up to them, but they, quite frankly, really were not close at all. And they're going to be taking on Mississippi State, who, believe it or not, is a pretty talented basketball team, and they have one of the more underrated players in the country that I'm going to tell you guys about. Let's start off with the Mississippi State Bulldogs. And the Bulldogs are a team that, I'm going to be honest with you guys, before the season started, I saw that they had lost Reggie Perry. They had lost Nick Witherspoon, the guys that really made up the nucleus of the team 2 years ago that actually made it to the NCAA tournament. And I wasn't really too high on this Mississippi State Bulldog team, because without those two guys, and that's a team that didn't even come close really to making the tournament last year, how would they be able to do this year? And the improvement of two guys in particular, DJ Stewart and Iverson Mullinar, has been absolutely phenomenal. DJ Stewart is actually the winner of the SEC Most Improved Player of the Year in my books. He currently averages 16.5 points per game, 3.2 rebounds per game, and 2.7 assists per game, while last year he was averaging about 8.5 points per game, about an assist and a half per game, and about 2.5 rebounds per game. He is very improved. His game is so much more diverse. The other one, Iverson Mullinar, is a member of my first team All-SEC conference team. This is a guard that could do it all, averaging 16.4 points per game, 4 rebounds per game, 2.5 assists per game, and shooting about 44.5% from three. This is another guy on Mississippi State who is really improved, and these two guys make this Bulldog offense go, and it is super, super dynamic. Tolu Smith, transfer, he had a pretty solid year, 12.7 points per game. He's their third leading scorer. Abdul Adu is a guy that has been around the program for a while, and I think the development of Stewart and Mullinar does give me a little bit of hope with this Mississippi State team being led by head coach Ben Howland. This is a coach that has led UCLA teams to the Final Four in the past. We know how many really good basketball players that he has coached in his career. So I do think Ben Howland, he's been at Mississippi State a couple years now. The program, they didn't have an awful season. I'm not 100% sure what the future holds, but it could have gotten worse this season. I guess that's what I'll say. Mississippi State had a very up and down SEC regular season. They started off 4-2, including a big-time home win against Florida, a big home win against Missouri, and a road win against Georgia. They then followed it up by losing to Ole Miss, Alabama, and Tennessee. Lost to Arkansas, had a nice win against South Carolina, beat Ole Miss, beat South Carolina again, and beat Texas A&M. So this is a Mississippi State team that finishes their SEC regular season with a record of 8-10, 14-13 overall. And this is a Bulldog team that it really, I think, goes how far Mullinar and Stewart take them. I watched Mississippi State a little bit against Auburn on Saturday. They ended up losing 78-71. Smith played well. He had 20 points in 36 minutes. Stewart and Mullinar had 19 and 17 apiece, but really nothing else. Javen Davis, the Alabama transfer, came off the bench. He unfortunately was not really able to give them anything. Neither was Quentin Post in 8 minutes. Matthews, the guard, he only gave them 4. So if I'm a Mississippi State fan, that's one thing. If I want to beat Kentucky, that I'm really looking for more bench production. And Mississippi State played Kentucky early in SEC play. That was the Dante Allen game when Dante just came off the bench and would not stop hitting threes. Let's get into Kentucky for a little bit. And the Wildcats, I'll admit, they were my pick to win the national championship before the season started. Unfortunately, it hasn't really worked out. Terrence Clark is no longer going to ever play in a Kentucky uniform again, if I were to predict. I don't know what the deal is with him. I guess he wanted to play, according to John Calipari. I don't really know how much I believe that, but Terrence Clark is going to be someone that Kentucky fans are just going to ask what if he could have gotten on the floor a little bit more. But anyway, we all know what this season has happened with Kentucky, right? They had a bunch of freshmen: B.J. Boston, Devin Askew, Isaiah Jackson, Terrence Clark, Lance Ware. They had a lot of really good freshmen coming in as usual, and we all thought that John Calipari, he's had so many teams over the course of his career like this, full of freshmen that he relies on, and even though many times they will struggle early, like Kentucky did earlier this season, losing to Kansas, losing to Georgia Tech, losing to Notre Dame, but at the same time, they were not able to get over the hump like other past Kentucky teams have been able to do. And the frustrating thing is, if you are a Kentucky fan, throughout the first half of the season, there were many moments where Kentucky would come out here and play awful during games, but still, as bad as they were, they still would actually have somewhat of a legitimate chance to win late. But unfortunately, they were just never able to get the job done. You remember the game against Notre Dame when they were down a big amount, somehow, some way mounted a comeback late. Unfortunately, it was too little too late. They end up losing that game by 1 point. They lose to Louisville by 3. Olivier Sarr missed a basket that would have given Kentucky the possible win there. They lose to Georgia late. They lose to Missouri late. They lose to Arkansas late. There have been so many games where Kentucky has just blown an opportunity. And once again, the unfortunate thing is they had some stretches throughout the regular season where it's like, oh, has Kentucky turned a corner? most notably that 3-game winning streak when they beat Auburn, they beat Vanderbilt, and they went on the road to Tennessee and not only won, but beat them by 15 points, which was a super, super impressive effort. But since then, they took 2 bad losses to Florida and Ole Miss. So Kentucky is a team that we know the talent they have. B.J. Boston is a very talented basketball player, but he really struggled as a freshman, averaging 12 points a game, that's fine, but shooting 30% from 3, and especially when you consider what the expectations were for this guy, it's reasonable for Kentucky fans to be disappointed. Davion Mintz has had a really nice season. He's been the one guy, I think, that has really been able to hold the fort together for Kentucky. I feel like every time the Wildcats needed a big shot this season, Davion Mintz was the one guy on the team that was able to deliver. Olivier Sarr, he was a disappointment. I'm not going to deny it. Only averaging 10.7 points, 5 rebounds, about a block and a half per game. And I just feel like he didn't necessarily make the big-time impact a lot of people expected him to make. Devin Askew was fine, but he didn't necessarily look like he was ready to be a starting point guard for a good SEC team. And why is that? Maybe because he reclassified. He just didn't necessarily look ready for primetime this year. I like Isaiah Jackson a lot. I think he's going to have a spot for him in the NBA, but he was, I think, the one bright spot in terms of the freshmen this season for Kentucky. And once again, the theme of Kentucky's season has been so close, but not enough, and too little too late, and mantras of that. I do think Kentucky is going to beat Mississippi State. I trust John Calipari to get his team at least ready to win one SEC tournament game. We know the prior success John Calipari has had in his career as the head coach of Kentucky in the SEC tournament. I'm sure there will be some Wildcat fans there supporting the team. This is going to be a really even game. If I'm a Wildcat fan, why not get Dante Allen a little bit more of a run? We know what this guy's capable of. Kentucky still really struggles to make threes. And against South Carolina, they had some guys play really well. B.J. Boston had 21, going 7 of 13 from the field. Davion Mintz had 20, Olivier Sarr 15, Isaiah Jackson 13. Maybe, just maybe, Kentucky is going to be able to build off that win against South Carolina and move on. I'm predicting it to happen. Okay, moving on to the next game in the SEC tournament. This will be game number 3 between the number 13 seeded Texas A&M Aggies, who I actually predicted to beat Vanderbilt in the first round. They will be taking on the number 5 seed Florida Gators. And let's talk about Florida for a little bit. And I'm not going to lie, this season has really gone exactly the way I expected it to be for the Gators. They finish with a overall record of 13-8 and a conference record of 9-7. And I'll say this, I'm happy Kiante Johnson is okay. We all remember what happened to him early in the season in their away game against Florida State. He's on the sidelines, an active member on that Florida State bench. I just wanted to say I'm happy he's doing okay. That is one of the best news of the college basketball season, because that was a scary moment when it happened, and it really put into perspective just how important life is and just how quickly things could change. But the Florida Gators, Mike White has been a coach who has been known for, over the last couple of years, underachieving relative to the talent that he has had. And I'll admit, on paper, when you look at this Florida Gator roster, you see a guy in Scotty Lewis that is going to play in the NBA. You see a kid in Trey Mann who is a highly ranked recruit. Colin Castleton, who is a member of my first team all-conference SEC squad, along with Iverson Mullinar from Mississippi State, who I mentioned earlier. He had a really good season, and I think if you ask me, Zach, what was the one big-time bright spot of this Florida Gator season, Colin Castleton would be my answer, because let's face facts. When this guy was at Michigan, he didn't look right, and he didn't look like a guy that I could see in the future possibly breaking out and becoming an impact player in big-time D1 college basketball. But that is exactly what he has done. Castleton finishes the regular season averaging 12.8 points per game, 5.7 rebounds per game, 1.1 assists per game, and 2.3 blocks per game. When you watch the Florida Gators play, you see just how much of a defensive impact he has in the paint. There were many times this season where I would watch Florida, and it really stood out to me, wow, Colin Castleton literally changed the game with his defensive impact, blocking the ball. That was super impressive. But unfortunately, Colin Castleton, Trey Mann, Scotty Lewis, all these guys, it's nothing new for Mike White. Mike White, since he's gotten to Florida, is another coach that has had so much talent but has not been able to win at all relative to that talent. And I do think that when we compare this roster of the Florida Gators compared to some of their other past rosters, it's not like this roster in particular stands out. And that's why Florida finishing 5th in the SEC and as an 8 or 9 seed in the NCAA tournament projection, that is really exactly where I expected them to be. Now, they really did not play well against good teams. They had a nice win against Tennessee, had a nice win against West Virginia, but lost to Arkansas, lost to Missouri, lost to Tennessee, lost to Alabama, lost to Florida State. But for the most part, Mike White actually has taken care of business this season against the teams that he's supposed to beat. For example, getting a win against Georgia, getting a win against Ole Miss at home. Now, Florida did lose to Mississippi State on the road. They did lose to Arkansas on the road, lost to South Carolina at home. That is a Mike White special, and those are the exact games that no matter how much talent the Florida Gators had, I learned my lesson last year when they had Kerry Blackshear and Andrew Nebhart and Scotty Lewis and Noah Locke. We know how much talent was on that Florida Gator team, and they were one of the more disappointing teams in college basketball that I remember. But the Gators are exactly on par for where I thought they'd be. I cannot see them winning more than one NCAA tournament game. With that being said, I do have them beating Texas A&M in the first round of the SEC tournament. These two teams actually did not play throughout the regular season. It's funny, if Texas A&M beats Vanderbilt, that means the first two teams that they would be matched up against in the SEC tournament, they both have not seen during the regular season. So that just tells you how crazy the impact of COVID-19 has had on this college basketball season. But Texas A&M is a solid squad, but I do expect Florida to get the win. I think their talent takes advantage, and if Mike White loses to Buzz Williams, then Florida should legit move down a seed line or two, because that is a game that when you are in NCAA tournament contention, all that could do is ruin your seeding, nothing else. So I do like Florida to move on against Texas A&M and take on the Tennessee Vols. Okay, moving on to the next game in round 2 of the SEC tournament preview. It will be game 4, the number 10 seed, the Georgia Bulldogs under head coach Tom Crean. They will be taking on the number 7 seed Lsu Tigers under head coach Cuonzo Martin. And this is a fascinating matchup because Georgia and Missouri were two teams that actually finished not really where I expected them to, unlike Florida. And I'll start off with Georgia, and I'll admit, there were many times through last season where I would watch Georgia and I'd say, look, they have Anthony Edwards and they have a lot of other really good young players that this team shouldn't be bad on paper. When you have Edwards along with Severe Wheeler, Tumani Kamara, Ty Fagan, Christian Brown, they had some talent on last year's team. The big man, Hammonds as well. They had some talent, and unfortunately, Georgia really was not good at all. And one of the many reasons I thought that, okay, long term, I'm not really going to be a huge fan of Georgia, I don't think that hiring Tom Crean was a bad hire. I don't think he's a bad basketball coach. I think he got a bad rap at Indiana. There are much worse basketball coaches than Tom Crean. But I just thought when you were a team like Georgia, they just finished Mark Fox and the disaster of a run that was. And I shouldn't say it was a disaster. He had a good run at Georgia, but it was time to move on. Both sides knew it. I thought that they needed a guy from the mid-major rank to come in and turn their program around. And Tom Crean, to me, felt like the hire that Georgia made because they were trying to win the press conference. They wanted other college basketball writers to compliment them for the hire because Tom Crean just finished up a great stint to many as a broadcaster on ESPN. And last year, even though Tom Crean was able to bring in Anthony Edwards and bring in some other talent, Georgia was pretty disappointing. every time you watch them in the big game, they were not able to get the job done. And this year, without Anthony Edwards, I expected them to be even worse. And for their credit, they've actually been better than I expected, as the Bulldogs finish as the number 10 seed in the SEC, an overall record of 14-11, and a conference record of 7-11. They had a nice home win against LSU. They had a home win against Missouri, who they will be taking on in round 1 of the SEC tournament. They had a road win against Auburn, a home win against Kentucky, a road win against Ole Miss. During non-conference play, they had a nice home win against Cincinnati. So Georgia has had some nice games this season, but they've had some other games against Alabama, giving up 115 points, losing to South Carolina by 30 plus. They've had some tough losses as well. So Georgia, the one thing I will also say is that they play much better team basketball. I actually think Severe Wheeler is one of the more underrated players in college basketball. He averages 14 points per game, 3.9 rebounds per game, and 7.2 assists per game. He's a really good player. You pair him with Toumani Camara, one of the more improved players in college basketball. He showed flashes last year when I was watching Georgia, averaging 12.8 points, 7.6 rebounds. Justin Kier, he's been pretty solid as well. Ty Fagan. So Georgia does have some talent here. Their defense has not been ideal. That is the one thing they obviously have to work on. But I do think Georgia did overachieve relative to my expectations. The team they will be taking on will be the number 7 seed Lsu Tigers. And it's funny because I actually did label Missouri as a possible sweeper going into the season, because even though I'm not necessarily the biggest Cuonzo Martin supporter as a head coach, there's no denying that Missouri wasn't awful last year and did bring back a big majority of the team. And we all remember just how hot the Lsu Tigers non-conference season started, getting a big-time win against Oregon, getting a big-time road win that has really aged nicely against Wichita State, getting a home win against Illinois, and then picking up a road win to start off SEC play against Arkansas following a bad beating loss they took against the Tennessee Volunteers. So Missouri has had their ups and downs. What I do like about Missouri is their continuity. And this is a team that when you watch them, they're not the prettiest basketball team, especially on the offensive side of the ball. But they win with their defense and they win with their toughness. They are really a team that expects contributions from whoever's on the floor, and that shows because they have 4 different players in double figures. Drew Smith averaging 14.1 points per game. Xavier Pinson, he's had a really nice season, averaging 14 points per game. Jeremiah Tillman, big man, it feels like he's been in college forever, and he is really, I think, the big key to the Lsu Tigers squad. He averaged 12.5 points per game, and Mark Smith averaging 10 points per game. Role players like Kobe Brown, Javon Pickett, Mitchell Smith, and Parker Braun and Drew Buggs have helped as well. But when you look at Missouri, Jeremiah Tillman is a huge key, because I feel like every time we watch the Lsu Tigers play, that dude is in foul trouble. And when he's on the floor, he's really good. I don't think anyone is going to deny that. He's had some monstrous rebounding numbers this year, including 12 rebounds in a game, 10 rebounds a game. He is a guy that has put up multiple double-doubles throughout the season. The key always is, can he stay on the floor? Now, I do think as the SEC regular season went on, we started to see from Missouri a little bit of a regression. And by a regression, I don't want to sound awful when I say that, but I think we started to see the Tigers fall back to the pack when they lost to Ole Miss on the road, when they lost to Auburn on the road, when they lost to Mississippi State on the road, losing to Georgia on the road. These are games that if you are a legitimate NCAA tournament contender and a legit SEC contender, like a lot of people thought Missouri was after their hot start, those are the games you have to win. And Missouri's resume is really good. They're going to be a 6 or 7 seed in the NCAA tournament, despite being a 7 seed in the SEC tournament, because of their big-time wins against Oregon and most notably against Illinois during the non-conference portion of their schedule. Missouri did take on Georgia on Tuesday, February 16th. Georgia won that in Athens, 80-70. That has been their only matchup this season. And with that being said, I'm going to pick Missouri to get the win over Georgia. Hanzo Martin has done a decent job this season. I do think a lot of it just has to do with the fact that he has a lot of players back. But really, this was a season that Hanzo Martin needed because Michael Porter, we all know what happened the season he was in Columbia. That was just bad luck for all sides. It was unfortunate that happened. But the last two seasons with this recruiting class, they were all right, but they really didn't have that one notable moment that made you say, okay, Missouri is really on the brink of breaking out. That was one of the main reasons I wasn't necessarily that high on the Tigers to start off the season. With that being said, they are an NCAA tournament team. I watched them against Florida on Wednesday night, getting a road win. That was a nice win. Drew Smith for the win, basically at the buzzer. There were many times throughout that game when you watched that you were like, wow, is Missouri going to lose this game? And then they also lost to LSU in a tight game on Saturday, 86-80. Missouri, I feel like every game they play in, it's close, but they're a team that is going to be comfortably in the SEC tournament and in the NCAA tournament, obviously. But they're a team I think early could be on upset alert. I'm curious to see what they do here. They should take care of business against Georgia, but if they don't, maybe that's a sign. Moving on in the SEC to the next and final game in round 2, it will be between the number 11 seeded South Carolina Gamecocks and the number 6 seeded Ole Miss Rebels. And let's start talking some South Carolina because it is crazy. I say this all the time when it comes to South Carolina basketball. You remember only a couple years ago when Frank Martin was the hottest thing in college basketball, and all of a sudden you turn around, South Carolina is out here beating Duke, and they are in the Final Four. You guys remember that? It's not that long ago, even though it does seem like about 10 years ago. And I remember saying it at the time that when you're a school like South Carolina that most notably is known for football and really doesn't have much basketball history, and you have a run to the Final Four like they had, you have to be able to capitalize on that run by bringing in as much talent as you can and really catapulting and using that momentum that you used in that Final Four run to build your program. And unfortunately, Frank Martin was not able to do that, and he has not been able to do that over the last couple years. And we watched South Carolina have some really good players, whether if you look at the team this year and you see A.J. Lawson just balling out each and every night. You look at a guy like Chris Silva, who is currently in the NBA with the Miami Heat. I feel like most people didn't really appreciate him enough when he was in South Carolina because as good of a player as he was, he just flat out didn't play in enough big games, and that was with him playing as a Final Four member as a freshman. So that's pretty crazy. And so far this season, South Carolina, the other thing I've noticed about them throughout past seasons, I should say, is that very early on, usually in non-conference play over the last couple of years, South Carolina takes one brutal loss to a mid-major team that they should just have absolutely no business losing to. They've lost to Stony Brook in the past. They've lost to UMass Lowell in the past. And I understand they're a good team, but they lost to Liberty by 18 points early in the season. That is not how you want to start your season off. They also had 4 games early in the season canceled due to COVID. And really, they didn't have the upset win. You remember a couple years ago, they had the big buzzer beater win against Kentucky. I feel like South Carolina, due to the physicality and toughness they do play with under Frank Martin, a lot of times throughout SEC play, they'll be able to pull off an upset win that not necessarily a lot of people expect to see coming. However, at the same time, this year they weren't really able to do that. They did pick up a nice road win against Florida, picked up a home win against Georgia, picked up a home win against Texas A&M, and picked up a road win against Georgia. So South Carolina actually swept Georgia. Not an ideal look for Tom Crean there. But the Gamecocks, it's unfortunate too because they have a really good player in A.J. Lawson. But he's another guy that just not enough people know about because he doesn't play in enough big games. He averaged about 17 points per game this season, shooting 35.6% from 3, 4 rebounds per game as well. I think he could be a guy that we see in the NBA due to his length and athleticism. Keyshawn Bryant is another guy for South Carolina that had a really nice season, averaging 14.4 points per game, shooting 20.7% from 3. Jermaine Kusnar, Justin Justin Minaya, Trey Hannibal, guys that have been in the program for the last couple years now. They were fine, averaging anywhere from 5 to 7 points, just were not really able to take that next step and break through. And I do think there is a realistic chance that this South Carolina job opens this upcoming offseason, because Frank Martin over the last couple of years has not been getting the job done, and finishing this season with an overall record of 6-14 and a conference record of 4-12, that is just not ideal, to say the least. So I do think South Carolina, they're just not a team I put any stock in right now. They usually are a team that finishes around 4th or 5th in this SEC race towards the end of the season, and then once the SEC tournament starts, we'll turn around and see them as the 5 seed, and you'll be like, what? How did this team finish there? They were not even able to do that this season, and that's even without them taking themselves out early in the non-conference portion of the schedule like they usually do. So that's South Carolina. They'll be taking on the number 6 seeded Ole Miss Runnin' Rebels. And what I will say is, Ole Miss actually low-key was a little bit disappointing last season. I remember going into last season, coming off the phenomenal job that Kermit Davis was able to do during his first year in Oxford, leading that Ole Miss team to the NCAA tournament. That was a super impressive coaching job, and he brought a lot of guys back last year, including Breon Tyree and Devonte Schuler, who is a baller on the team right now. And Ole Miss is another team that's had some up and downs. They took a tough loss early to Dayton, struggled in SEC play, starting off 1-4, losing to Alabama, LSU, Florida, and Georgia. But since then, they've had some nice wins, including picking up a nice win against Tennessee, picking up a road win against Auburn, picking up a home win against Missouri, picking up a road win against South Carolina, picking up another road win against Missouri, and picking up a home win against Kentucky. And Kermit Davis is a coach that I trust in these games, and I trust in these spots. And he's a coach that he doesn't always have the best talent, but he's always able to do more with less, dating back to his days as the head coach at Middle Tennessee State. Devonte Schuler, I told you, the kid is an absolute baller, averaging 15.6 points per game, 34.5% from 3. If you remember, he actually played on that same AAU team in South Carolina as Zion Williamson and Ja Morant. The other guy I love for this Mississippi State team is Romello White, the transfer from Arizona State. And if you watched the Sun Devils play this past season, it was pretty obvious that they really missed Romello White and his size up front. And Jarkel Joyner, another transfer who had a nice season, averaging 10.8 points per game as a guard. The other kid I wanted to watch for Ole Miss, Matthew Morrell, former top 50 recruit. He only averaged 4 points per game, 33% from 3. I am curious to see if in this SEC tournament he'll be able to make a little bit bigger of an impact than he's made in the past. I did watch Ole Miss a little bit last night against Vanderbilt, I should say. Jarkel Joyner led the way with 15 points in that one, and for the Rebels. And Ole Miss got some nice production out of the bench. Morrell actually had 8. It'll be interesting to see if he will be able to keep that up. I do like the Rebels to beat South Carolina. I trust Kermit Davis more than Frank Martin. I think Ole Miss will play harder. I think they're going to want it more. And Ole Miss, there have been times throughout the regular season where we turned around and said, okay, maybe could this team be playing their way onto the bubble? I think in order for them to do that, they would have to not only beat South Carolina, beat LSU, and then maybe beat Arkansas, and then that's when we'll start seriously talking about, okay, maybe, just maybe, this Ole Miss team could make the NCAA tournament. But I do have them at least having a shot against LSU. I have them beating South Carolina and moving on. Okay, moving on to the next round of the SEC tournament. This will be the semifinals, or the quarterfinals, I should say. And let's start it off. The number 8 seed Kentucky Wildcats taking on the number 1 seed and the SEC champion Alabama Crimson Tide, along with their head coach Nate Oates. And for every one of these conference tournament preview podcasts that I will be doing, I will be giving out as one of my awards, the most disappointing team in the SEC. And I didn't mention it when I started off the Kentucky segment because I didn't even think it was warranted. But yes, Kentucky, the team that I predicted to win the national championship in the preseason, is by far and away the most disappointing team in the SEC, even though Tennessee, a team that I will be getting to in a little bit, aren't necessarily too far off. But let's talk a little bit about Alabama, because the Tide are a very interesting squad. And when I think of Alabama, it's funny because I think of another program that over the last 5 to 6 years has really tried their best to become relevant when it comes to basketball. One thing about the SEC that I've realized, and it was about 3 or 4 years ago, that there was a movement that the SEC all of a sudden really said, okay, we're showing basketball games on this network and we want our product to improve. So you know what happened? Arkansas hired Eric Musselman. Alabama hires Nate Oates. LSU brings in Will Wade. Ole Miss brings in Kermit Davis. Mississippi State brings in Ben Howland. You already have John Calipari at Kentucky. Georgia brings in Tom Creed, a coach has been to the Final Four. We have so many good coaches in this league, and Alabama had Avery Johnson before that, a guy who has coached in the NBA as well. But unfortunately, while Avery Johnson was here, he was another guy that, even though he had absolutely no problem when it came to bringing in talent like Colin Sexton, like a John Petty, like a Riley Norris, like a Dante Hall, they unfortunately did not translate to wins. And I remember watching Alabama. He obviously brought in Kyra Lewis as well, who's playing in the NBA with the New Orleans Pelicans. I remember watching Alabama and just flat out saying to myself, are these guys just cursed? Are they ever going to be good? Because no matter how much I like their roster, I feel like they're never able to come through. And I knew just how good of a coach Nate Oates was at Buffalo, and it was going to take time, no doubt about it. But when he was out at Alabama in year one, it was once again a lot of the same struggles they had under Avery Johnson. And even early in this year, this is what makes the Crimson Tide season so crazy, right? Early in this season, Alabama had some clunkers, losing to Stanford in the first round of the Maui Invitational by 18 points, losing to Clemson by 8, losing to Western Kentucky at home. I know Western Kentucky is really good, but those are games that you should be winning at home. And then all of a sudden, to start off SEC play, they go into Tennessee and win. Then they beat Florida at home. They then beat Auburn at home. They then beat Kentucky. They blow out Arkansas. They blow out LSU. And then you turn around, and these guys are 9-0 in first place all by themselves in the top of the SEC. And you turn around and you realize that Nate Oates has done a phenomenal job in a very short period of time, really transforming this roster with guys that he brought into the program like Jaden Shackelford. And Herb Jones and Alex Reese were there before, but Jordan Bruner, the transfer from Yale, we've seen what he's been able to do healthy and how much of a difference he's been able to make into Alabama. You also look at some of the other guys like Rashawn Gary. You look at some of the other guys like, Josh Primo, who's been in the program. This is his first year. Keon Ellis, I should say. James Rojas, who was injured last year. The good thing about this Alabama team is that they have plenty of guys that have the ability to beat you on any given night. And at the top, man, the leaders of this team have been through the battles. They've been through the wars. I said specifically that Nate Oates has done a good job transforming most of the roster here at Alabama by keeping John Petty and keeping Herb Jones and keeping Alex Reese. Those guys are the holdovers from the Avery Johnson era. And I always say, when you're a first-year head coach at a new school, right, that is always going to be one of your hardest jobs, is convincing the guys that were there prior to you that you didn't recruit to play there. How could you get them to stay? Because we all know how eventually winners are built in college basketball, by experience and going through the battles and going through the wars together, and eventually everyone's on the same page. Under a good coach, you get the job done. And John Petty, Herb Jones, Alex Reese, those guys stayed in the program, and it is paying off for them playing for such a good coach like Nate Oates. And John Petty is actually the next guy I wanted to talk about. One thing I have really been able to notice about John Petty is that He has really improved since he got to Alabama, and that is something we obviously don't say for everyone who plays college basketball. And I think this season we have been really able to see for the first time in his career. I guess he showed it a little bit last year, but really this season, for the first time playing in big games, we've been able to see just how good and just how dynamic a possible version of a consistent John Petty could be. And he is the next member of my first team All-SEC squad. He will join Iverson Mullinar of Mississippi State and Colin Castleton of Florida as the third member. We still have two more members to announce before the end of the podcast. And I do think when you look at John Petty, seeing him develop throughout his college career has been really nice to watch. Herb Jones, Alex Reese, those guys have been the backbone of this Alabama program for a while now. I do like Alabama to beat Kentucky in Game 6 and Game number 1 of the quarterfinals. It's been a really disappointing season for Kentucky, and I understand Alabama has already beaten them twice. It is very hard to beat a team 3 times during the regular season, but when I watch Kentucky, they're just not a good basketball team. That game against Florida was really the last straw. If they really had anything left, they would have been able to show me it that day. I know Jacob Toppin has been the one guy I didn't mention that actually has been much better than I think anyone could have expected for Kentucky. As going into the season, he was a guy that John Calipari and a lot of other people weren't even expecting to play. They were just expecting him to take a year off as a redshirt. And overall, it's just been a disappointing season for Kentucky. Alabama has been playing their best basketball as of late. I really want to see them go into the SEC tournament and carry that momentum they get from winning some games in the SEC tournament into the NCAA tournament, because we all know that Alabama was playing their best basketball when they were going into Knoxville, Tennessee and winning and blowing out a good Arkansas team and blowing out a good LSU team and beating Auburn. But since that game against Oklahoma, I don't want to say they've been bad, but they haven't necessarily been that same team that we saw early. And I think that from a talent perspective, Alabama is good enough to make the Final Four, but the way they've played the last couple weeks with some inconsistency, I watched them a little bit against Georgia yesterday. They were not great in the first half of that game. Luckily for them, they were able to come back and get the job done. I want to see them not only beat Kentucky, but whoever they get in the semifinals is going to be big as well. If I'm a Bama fan, I really want to see my team create some momentum going into March Madness from that SEC. Moving on to the next game in the SEC, how about the number 5 seed Florida Gators, who, as I mentioned earlier, I have them moving on against Texas A&M. They will be taking on the number 4 seeded Tennessee Volunteers. And it's funny because these two teams actually played earlier today. Tennessee ended up getting the win. And let me say this about Tennessee. I know that I mentioned Kentucky and the fact that by far and away they were the most disappointing team in college basketball, in my opinion, and really the SEC. But Tennessee, I don't think is that far off, because I actually predicted the Volunteers to win the SEC. And they were a team that when you look at the Volunteers, I thought they had everything that the usual national championship team has in terms of the way their roster is constructed and in terms of the ingredients. One thing I always say about teams that I think I'm high on winning a national championship, I love teams that have a great combination of talent and experience. And when I looked at this Tennessee Volunteer roster, right, I totally understood that the Volunteers last year weren't the best team. This group of guys were together for last season, and they didn't make the NCAA tournament. But one thing that I really realized last year was after Santiago Vescovi was able to come from Uruguay and join the Tennessee Vols, Rick Barnes had these guys playing well, and they almost played their way onto the bubble. They were just short of it, and they were really improving as SEC play was going. You were able to see that was pretty evident when you watched the Tennessee Volunteers play. Now, their offense wasn't perfect. One of the reasons why I was so high on Tennessee was because they brought all of those guys back from last year, Vescovi, Pons, Fulkerson, Josiah Jordan-James, along with guys that I think can make a difference. Freshmen like Jaden Springer and Kiante Johnson, and both those guys have been pretty solid, but I do think from an offensive perspective, the problem if you're a Tennessee fan is that you have relied on those guys for just a little bit too much of your offensive production. And Victor Bailey, the transfer from Oregon, he's been better than I've expected so far. But at the same time, if you're a Tennessee fan, I don't think you were going into the season really expecting to rely on him. The other thing I'll say about the Tennessee Volunteers is that early on, their schedule was pretty weak, but I was always among the belief that it's like, all right, they're winning games. Why not? We saw what they were able to do against a good Colorado team and against a good Missouri team. And then even after they lost to Alabama, they counter with a nice win at home against Arkansas, which is really aged nicely. They also had a nice win against Kansas, a win against Kentucky as well. But there were many times throughout this regular season when we were sitting here and we were watching the Tennessee Volunteers play, and you just asked yourself, how good are these guys really? Do we know what we're going to be expecting from these guys on a night in and night out basis? And I think the answer to that question so far has been no. But what I also will say is this. In the first round of this SEC tournament, Tennessee is going to be taking on Florida. And as I mentioned, Tennessee played Florida today. And I'll admit, going into this game, I wasn't feeling great from a Tennessee perspective just because of this. I watched the Volunteers play last Saturday against Auburn, and not only did they lose to Auburn, but Sharif Cooper didn't play. And we know that when we watch Auburn so far this season, they are just not a very talented basketball team without Sharif Cooper. And this Tennessee Volunteer team, a team full of veteran, talented, experienced guys, I expected them to come through in that spot against Auburn. No question. This is a Tennessee Volunteer team that is experienced, and with that being said, I thought they would really be able to show me the ability to deal with adversity based on all of the experience they have, and to be honest, against Auburn, they weren't able to do that. And the one thing I said going into today's game against Florida is that it's senior day. John Fulkerson, Yves Pons, we know how much basketball these guys have played throughout their career. So if there ever was going to be a spot for Tennessee to turn a corner and get a job done, it was going to be this one, their last chance playing at home. And I was impressed because Tennessee was down 5 in the first half of this game against Florida. They were down 10 earlier in the first half. They then outscore Florida 37-21 in the second half, and maybe, just maybe, that is the momentum the Tennessee Volunteers need going into the SEC tournament. I'm going to predict Tennessee to beat Florida in this SEC tournament. Moving on to take on Kentucky. These two teams played twice, moving on to take on Alabama, I should say. These two teams played twice during the regular season. The home team won each matchup. I think Tennessee is more well coached. I understand why people are hesitant of Rick Barnes and his past struggles in the postseason, but I do trust him more than Mike White. I think Tennessee is the better team. I think they showed me today some ability to deal with adversity for the first time all season. I think they carry that momentum into a win against the Gators. Moving on to the next game in the SEC, it will be the number 7 seeded Missouri Tigers taking on the number 2 seed Arkansas Razorbacks. And I do feel very comfortable in saying that Arkansas is playing as good a basketball as anyone in the country right now. Not only the SEC, but yeah, you heard that right, in the country right now. And I have just been so impressed with what Eric Musselman has been able to do with his team, because this is another guy, along with Nate Oates. He came into the SEC last year, and it wasn't a perfect season. They had their highs, they had their lows. Throughout the start of this season, Arkansas really started their non-conference portion well. The problem was we didn't necessarily know how good they were because Eric Musselman's philosophy during the non-conference portion of his schedule was, okay, literally, we are going to just get in as many games as we possibly could, and the most likely way for that to happen is going to be us playing against all teams in the state of Arkansas. And in SEC play, they struggled a little bit early, losing to Missouri, losing to Tennessee, losing to LSU, losing to Alabama, and in those last two games I mentioned, they actually got blown out in both of those games. But one thing I should mention about those games was that they were missing Justin Smith, who is one of the more important members of their squad, the transfer from Indiana, and he has been super impressive. And when you watch Arkansas with him compared to Arkansas without him, you are really able to tell the difference between the two sides. It's night and day. Now, the other kid I wanted to mention for this Arkansas team that you have to know about, he is going to be the fourth member of my first team All-SEC squad, along with Iverson Mullinar, John Petty, and Colin Castleton. That is Moses Moody. And not only is he a member of my first team All-Conference squad, but he is also my winner for the SEC Freshman of the Year. He had a phenomenal season, averaging for the Razorbacks a total of 17.5 points per game, 5.7 rebounds per game, 1.8 assists per game, and 1 steal per game. You also love the contributions from J.D. Note, Jalen Tate, 2 transfers as well. J.D. Note is that guy that just sparks off the bench for offense. And the other thing that I wanted to mention for the Arkansas Razorbacks is this. Arkansas has now won a total of 8 games in a row. The last time Arkansas lost a game was on Saturday, January 30th in the Big 12 SEC Challenge against Oklahoma State. And one thing I remember about that game, towards the end especially, was, wow, Eric Musselman, a coach that, if you remember during his Nevada days, he had some trouble with his rotations. He had a team with so much talent, and as much talent as he literally had 10 to 12 guys that the diehard college basketball fan will look at and say, okay, those guys could be really good. Transfers from literally all over the place. And Muss was only out here playing 6 or 7 guys, and most notably, he is not a coach usually that plays freshmen. However, throughout the early to late portion of SEC play, really since that game against Oklahoma State, there have been 2 players in particular for this Arkansas Razorback team that have really been able to step up and make a big-time impact and really, I think, change the trajectory of the Arkansas Razorbacks season, and that's Jalen Williams and Devo Davis. You're going to look at these numbers for these guys during the season. Devo Davis averaging 7.5 points per game, 3.9 rebounds, 2 assists, shooting 22% from 3. You also look at Jalen Williams averaging only 4 points per game, 4.6 rebounds, about an assist per game. But those 2 guys have really changed the energy of this Arkansas Razorback team. And you could tell that these guys are playing great basketball. You could tell they want to play for their coach. And Arkansas is playing some great basketball. I do like them to beat Missouri. They are just playing much better basketball than Missouri. And I understand Missouri went into Bud Walton Arena and beat Arkansas earlier, but then Arkansas returned the favor, going right back to Columbia and beating the Tigers. I do think the Hogs are just playing so good right now that they're going to be able to overpower through Missouri. I do favor Eric Musselman as a coach over Konzo Martin as well. Give me the Razorbacks. Okay, moving on to the last and final game of the quarterfinals of this SEC tournament. It will be the number 6 seed Ole Miss Rebels, who will be fighting for their SEC tournament lives. They will be taking on the number 3 seed Lsu Tigers. And LSU, I think, is a team that not enough people are paying attention to right now. And LSU is a team that, to be honest, their season has really gone, along with Florida, how I've expected it to. They're a team full of young talent. When you look at Cam Thomas, he is my 5th and final member of my first team SEC squad. He will be joining Moses Moody, Colin Castleton, John Petty, and Iverson Mullinar as the 5 members of the first team all-conference squad, and I've been really impressed with how Cam Thomas has been able to step into college right away, demand the ball, and just say to the rest of his LSU teammates, okay, this is my game, get on my back, I got you. You also combine that with guys like Trendon Watford and Javonte Smart and Darius Days, guys that have been through the battles before, guys who have played for Will Wade. And when you take that top 4, there aren't many teams in college basketball that is going to be able to match the LSU Tigers and that group of 4. And at the same time, they have some role players: Charles Manning, Andre Hyatt, Mwani Wilkerson, guys like that who have really been able to step up over the last couple games. Now, LSU, they have been very up and down, as we would have expected. They've had some big-time wins going on the road to Missouri and winning. How about beating Tennessee at home? How about beating Arkansas at home? They also had a nice win against Ole Miss on the road. So LSU has had their moments. At the same time, they blew that game against Texas Tech. That was a game that really the LSU Tigers should have had. They also lost to Georgia. That's a loss they shouldn't be having. Losing to Kentucky on the road. Losing to Alabama by 30. That's not a game at home you necessarily expect LSU to lose. But the good thing, if you are a Tigers fan, is that your team does have enough wins on the resume right now to get to the NCAA tournament. I have them around the 8-9 line right now, and I will say this: if you are a number 1 seed, if you're Baylor, if you're Gonzaga, if you're Michigan, and you see LSU as the other team in your opposing bracket, that is not a team you're going to want to see, just because we know how much talent Will Wade has. And keep in mind, this is going to be Will Wade's first NCAA tournament as the head coach of the LSU Tigers, because 2 years ago, we all know just how good of a job Will Wade was able to do with the team of Tremont Waters and Javonte Smart was a freshman on that team, Skylar Mays, Emmett Williams, Naz Reid as well. That was a team that I think if Will Wade was back on the sidelines, they went to the Sweet 16. They even could have gone to the Final Four, but unfortunately, we all know the circumstances that happened there. It is crazy that Will Wade, he still has a job, and I don't think he's really going to be going anywhere anytime soon. But as much as everyone loves to joke around about Will Wade as a head coach, right? And the fact that, oh, how does this guy still a job? He's paying players to go to LSU. And I do admit, it is pretty weird that Naz Reid, one of the best basketball players in the state of New Jersey, decided to go to Louisiana for college. That's not really something that we see every day. But at the same time, Will Wade has done a really good job getting that talent to win games, and that is something that throughout the couple conference tournament preview podcasts that I've recorded so far that I can't really say about everyone, and that makes me think that Will Wade is actually a pretty good basketball coach, and with the talent on this team, I do think LSU is going to beat Mississippi State or Ole Miss, and I do think LSU could win this tournament. I really do. They're that good. They're that dynamic. They could really, really play. And I think LSU is going to be a team to watch in this SEC tournament. I do think that they beat Ole Miss, and we're going to have a chalk quarterfinals in the SEC. Number 4, Tennessee. Number 1, Alabama. And number 3, LSU. And number 2, Arkansas. Okay, moving on to the semifinals, it will be number 4 seeded Tennessee against the number 1 seeded Alabama Crimson Tide. And I will say this, if I had a vote for SEC Coach of the Year, my vote would go to Nate Oates of Alabama. I think that he has done a phenomenal job really being able to turn that program around, bringing in his guys like I mentioned. However, I actually am going to pick Rick Barnes and the Tennessee Volunteers to win this game. And it's funny because Alabama, if you remember, their run of becoming the best team in the SEC started with their game in Knoxville against Tennessee. The only problem is I think we're forgetting just how long ago that game was. And even though over the last couple weeks, it's not like Alabama has been bad per se while they have been in the SEC. They've been winning for the most part games they're supposed to, but they haven't been the same team really since that game against Oklahoma. And if you remember in that game against Oklahoma, that was one that was really up for the taking, but unfortunately they were not able to get the job done. And since then, they haven't been bad, but once again, they have taken some losses that you just flat out wouldn't necessarily expect them to take. You look at Tennessee, I do think that the Volunteers do provide a unique matchup that could frustrate Alabama. We all know why Alabama is so good, because they have shown the ability to shoot threes, and when they get hot, they are probably the most fun team in college basketball to watch. And that is another reason why I think Coach Nate Oates has done such a phenomenal job really turning this Alabama program into a place where high-level recruits are going to want to play. However, I do think the Tennessee Volunteers have a defense that could be set up to slow down that Alabama pace nicely, and I do think that for the first time, we could see the freshmen for Tennessee take over in a big moment and really live up to the hype. Not that they haven't already, but they just haven't necessarily done it in the big moment in front of everyone yet. I think Tennessee has the defense to slow down Alabama, and I know there have been plenty of times this season where I have put a lot of faith in the Tennessee Volunteers, and they have just flat out let me down. This is a team that early in the season, I remember saying I thought they could possibly be just as good as a Gonzaga, or just as good as a Baylor, or just as good as a Michigan, and unfortunately, they were not able to do that. I understand Alabama is the number one seed. I understand that really throughout the large portion of this regular season, Alabama has been the best team in the SEC. However, at the same time, I'm actually going to pick Tennessee to win this game. I know I've been blown by them before, but I liked what I saw from Tennessee against Florida. I like their talent. Give me the Vols over Bama. Now, I do think Alabama has had a great regular season. As I mentioned, John Petty was the fourth member of my first team All-SEC squad. Nate Oates was my SEC Coach of the Year. Now, moving on to this next game, number 11. The number 3 seeded LSU Tigers, coming off their win against Ole Miss, would be taking on the number 2 seeded Arkansas Razorbacks, coming off their win against Missouri. And I will start off by saying this. I think LSU is a team that not enough people are paying attention to. And I understand when you look at them on paper, you're going to see them as about an 8 or a 9 seed come March Madness. You're going to see a team that has been very inconsistent throughout a large portion of this regular season. And you're going to say to yourself, Zach, like, why do you have LSU going far? Why are they a team to watch? And what I will say is this. LSU has just about enough talent to beat anyone. And a good coach. Because I'll say this. A lot of people like to hate on Will Wade and make jokes, and I understand. It is a little bit sketchy how he got all of these guys to LSU. But what I also will say is this. This is going to be the first March Madness that Will Wade will be participating in as the head coach of LSU, because I do believe that team a couple years ago with Tremont Waters, Darius Days, Javonte Smart, Emmett Williams, Naz Reid, I thought that team was actually good enough to make a deep run in March Madness, and if they had Will Wade, I think they would have had a better chance, because if you remember, due to circumstances, he did not coach in the postseason that year. And the thing about Will Wade is a lot of people will crack their jokes, and the problem is this. There have been many times, as I've recorded these couple conference preview podcasts so far, that I've told you guys about a team that has had no problem bringing in talent. But at the same time, they're never able to translate into wins. And Will Wade and LSU is not on that list. Every year, Will Wade really does have LSU in position to make the NCAA tournament. And I think this year, even though they've been inconsistent, they are a team that could be a real threat. And I think in this matchup against Arkansas, I would be very curious to see LSU's athleticism. That is the first thing that pops off the pages to me when you ask, okay, what exactly does LSU do well? Against Arkansas's physicality and their toughness, and we all know just how physical of a team Arkansas is. I think this is going to be the best game of the SEC tournament. It was the hardest game for me to pick in the SEC tournament. I'm going to pick the Razorbacks, but it's really close. I think it's going to be a phenomenal game. I like Arkansas. One other thing about Arkansas. I mentioned to you that I gave Moses Moody the slight edge for SEC Freshman of the Year over LSU's Cam Thomas. And unfortunately for LSU fans, that is going to be the same result when it comes to the SEC Player of the Year. It is very rare to have two freshmen in the conversation for an award like this. In a Power 6 conference, usually the only freshmen that win Player of the Year awards are the generational types, right? Your Zion Williamsons, your big-time players that are going to go on and have long, long careers in the NBA. Well, guess what? That is exactly what Moses Moody has done since he's gotten to Fayetteville, Arkansas. And I understand, Eric Musselman, he's a good coach, and he's done a lot. But there are plenty of people around college basketball who's like, look, this dude promotes his program way too much. He's annoying. Just get out of my face. And I understand he's not the perfect coach. But Eric Musselman has developed Moses Moody and Mason Jones back-to-back years into guys that started off their basketball careers saying, okay, I just want to be a good college player, to, okay, I could play in the NBA, and Moses Moody is going to be a lottery pick, and I think Eric Musselman and the development that he's done with Moses has a lot to do with that. I think Arkansas LSU is going to be a phenomenal game. I do like the Razorbacks to move on in a close one. To recap the awards, Moses Moody from Arkansas is my SEC Player of the Year. Nate Oates from Alabama, my SEC Coach of the Year. Moses Moody from Arkansas is also my SEC Freshman of the Year. John Calipari in Kentucky, my biggest disappointment. First team all conference, Iverson Mullinar from Mississippi State, Cam Thomas from LSU, John Petty from Bama, Moses Moody from Arkansas, and Colin Castleton from Florida, and the most improved player in the SEC, DJ Stewart from Mississippi State. That will leave the championship game. Tennessee, the number 4 seed, taking on Arkansas, the number 2 seed. And as great of a run as it has been for Tennessee, I picked them to beat Florida, which is a 50-50 game. Picked them to beat Bama, which is a 50-50 game, maybe even less than that for their chances. I do like Arkansas to win the SEC tournament. And I understand, LSU could win this tournament. Alabama could win this tournament. Tennessee can win it. Maybe Kentucky, Florida, who knows, Missouri. But at the same time, I just kept on convincing myself and coming back to the point that Arkansas is playing the best basketball in the SEC right now, and it's not even close who it is. Arkansas is playing great. They've won 10 games in a row. They haven't lost since that game against Oklahoma State. So I've learned my lesson. There is no reason for me to pick against Arkansas now. Eric Musselman, Moses Moody, Justin Smith. I think Arkansas is going to be a trendy pick for a lot of people going into March Madness. They're my pick to win the SEC tournament. To recap it for you one more time, in round 1, I like the number 13 seed Texas A&M over the 12-seeded Vanderbilt Commodores. Like number 8-seeded Kentucky over 9-seeded Mississippi State in round 2 to start. Like number 5-seeded Florida over number 13-seeded A&M in Game 3. Game 4 in round 2, I like 7-seeded Missouri over number 10-seeded Georgia. Like number 6-seeded Ole Miss over 11-seeded South Carolina in Game 5. Game 6, give me Bama, the 1 seed, over number 8-seed Kentucky. Like Tennessee as the 4 seed over number 5-seeded Florida in Game 7. Game 8, number 2-seeded Arkansas, I like them over the 7-seed Missouri. Game 9, like LSU, the number 3 seed, over number 6-seeded Ole Miss. Game 10, I like Tennessee, the number 4 seed, over the number 1 seed Alabama Crimson Tide. And I like LSU, the number 3 seed, to lose to the number 2 seeded Arkansas Razorbacks. And I like Eric Musselman and the Hogs to cut the nets down in Nashville over Tennessee. Guys, I wanted to say thank you so much for listening. I know it's been a long episode, but keep expecting more of these conference tournament previews. I really enjoy talking college basketball with you guys. It's going to be a great time. Everyone stay safe, and I'll talk to you guys soon.